Hi, welcome to Hugo Selection. Hugo Selection is a compilation of the best books and productions found in Malaysia. They may be written by local authors or even foreign authors. At Hugo Selection, what we do is we will compile all the information on that book as well as other publications, and we will do a commentary on it. We will tell you what the book is all about and compare with some of the publications found on the same topic, and we'll give you our comments and our views on that particular book or the issue involved. Today I'm going to share with you a book called Brexit. Like the name suggests, it is about Greece exiting the Eurozone. Right now, we hear every day that Greece is having a lot of problems trying to service their loans, and they're defaulting on their loans to the IMF, to the World Bank, and to the ECB, as well as the many other foreign bankers that they owe money to. And as at 30th June 2015, they have actually defaulted on their loans to the IMF. This is a very serious matter, and so far the commentaries and the books written about this issue are not sufficient to really explain the situation. We have a few books actually written on Greece exit and problems related to Greece, but most of the other books are generally about world economy or the economy in Europe. And there are many articles, maybe hundreds or even thousands of articles written about Brexit, but they only give you the current latest news on the situation. For example, they will tell you Greece is about to default on its loans and they are owing a lot of money. But all these articles serve to give you more questions than answers. For example, how much loans do they actually owe and to who? For example, how much interest are being paid on those loans? Why do they actually owe so much money to people? What happened to Greece? Why do they need to borrow so much money? And what is the background of Greece? What is this country of Greece all about? There are so many questions that are not answered. For example, when you say they are owing so much money, how much is much? What is their GDP like? And how do you compare that loan amount with their GDP? So let me give you an example. Greece, ancient Greece, is a very famous country. Today, Greece is not famous for much. For example, Greece does not have a very famous football team. They do not produce the greatest scientists in the world. They are not a big country, and their manufacturing facilities are not the best in the world. Okay, so Greece right now in today's modern world, Greece is not really a famous country. But did you know that Greece was the cradle of the Western civilization during its days in ancient times? People like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle came from Greece. I'm sure you know who these people are. They are very famous philosophers. Okay, besides philosophers, they have Hippocrates, who is a medicine man, an ancient doctor who is very famous. And we have Pythagoras. I'm sure you have heard of Pythagoras' theorem, the mathematics that you study in school. You would have definitely studied Pythagoras' theorem. And how about Euclid? Maybe you do not know who Euclid is, but Euclidean geometry is very famous. And the book written by Euclid, the book is called The Elements. It's probably one of the most famous mathematical books ever written. Okay, these are all the famous people from Greece. And let me see who else is there. Archimedes. I'm sure you have heard of the principle of Archimedes and the story of how he helped the king to find out who cheated on doing his crown. His crown was made of gold and silver, and Archimedes managed to find out that someone tried to cheat the king. By using physics and mathematics, he proved that. Okay, who else is famous in Greece? Let me see. Greece, at that time there was a city called Sparta, and they produced the best soldiers during that time. I'm sure you have heard of Spartan soldiers. They are very famous, very strong, and very hardy. You can actually read more about ancient Greece in Brexit. Okay, so much for ancient Greece. Let's come back to modern Greece. Today, Greece is a country that is very famous for the wrong reasons. It is owing a lot of money and about to be bankrupt. Now, why is it so? What happened to Greece? The answer is simple, they owe a lot of money. But before that, why do they actually owe so much money? There are a few reasons. They are not the strongest country in the European Union or the EU, so that makes them a bit struggling in the economy. And one of the main reasons why they have so much problems in the economy is that a lot of people in Greece are trying to evade taxes. That means they try to not pay tax to the government, and the amount of taxes they evade is almost up to 25% of their GDP. It is almost like a national sport in Greece to avoid paying taxes and to run away. If eventually they get caught, the government officials who are supposed to punish them will be bribed. You see, there's the element of corruption that is involved in getting Greece into so much trouble. Okay? So all in all, their problems are partly caused by their indiscipline in running away taxes and doing so much corruption, from high levels of the government right down to the common man, which caused them to owe so much money. Their population is about 11 million people compared to a country like Malaysia, where we have about almost 30 million people. Okay? And their GDP is about 25 billion US dollars, slightly less than Malaysia's GDP of 280 billion US dollars. But their debts are almost 360 billion, which is more than 150% of their GDP. Now, what is the acceptable amount of debt compared to GDP? Because sometimes we see that this country owes a lot of money. The meaning of a lot can be different to different people. For example, if you say $2.6 million, is that a lot of money? Well, $2.6 million may be a lot of money to some people, but to some rich people, it is just peanuts. Similarly, if you say 2.6 billion is a lot of money, some people will tell you that it's actually a very small amount of money. Don't worry about it. So now, how do we actually tell you that such and such an amount is big or small? One of the ways is to compare it with something. For example, a low-cost house in a country like Malaysia will cost something like 40,000 to 42,000 ringgit. So, if there is an amount of say 42 billion, it can actually buy about 1 million units of low-cost houses. And 1 million units of houses can actually house something like 5 million people, assuming a house can actually stay 5 persons. So, if I tell you a sum of 42 billion ringgit, it can actually mean 5 million people's housing problems to be solved. Okay, now do you have a better idea what the amount is all about? So when we talk about Greece, we have an amount of 180% worth of debt compared to the GDP. So how do we compare GDP and debt? What is the acceptable level of debt for any country? For that, we have to refer to the IMF. There's a guideline which says that any country should not have more than 60% of debt compared to its GDP. And the amount of 180% compared to GDP is a very big amount if you compare it that way. Okay? So let us take a look at how some other countries compare. For example, the United States. What is its debt to GDP ratio? For the US, it is about 100 and slightly more than 100% right now compared to its GDP. Remember, the acceptable level is 60%. Okay, so that is something that's very high. And Europe generally, most countries in Europe have almost 100% of debt to GDP ratio. Even Germany, a very strong country, economically strong, they have a debt to GDP ratio of 77%. Okay, that is very high. Now you ask me, which country in the world has got the highest level of debt to GDP? That would be Japan, which is something like 240%. Wow. Why is Japan still not bankrupt yet? So the answer is that Japan owes a lot of money to its own citizens rather than to foreign countries or foreign banks compared to Greece. Okay, and which is the country that is having the lowest debt to GDP ratio? That would of course be China. China is a country that doesn't owe much money. China is a country with the lowest debt to GDP of less than 30%. Now let's come back to Greece. Greece is having 180%. So without a doubt, when we make the comparisons, Greece is having serious problems. 180% is really not acceptable and it's really not sustainable. The country would never be able to pay its debts at this rate. Okay? And to compound that problem, its GDP is not only increasing, it's also decreasing, which makes the problem even more serious. When you have more debt compared with a smaller GDP, it is even worse. The ratio shoots up even more. Okay? So now Greece is having a big problem, and we know why Greece had that problem in the first place. So the next thing we want to study is what happens when Greece is owing so much money. What is the kind of interest that they are paying for their borrowings? Okay, the answer is that it is quite abnormal for any country to pay more than say 4% interest on its loans. If you are paying more than 4%, it means that your risk of having a sovereign default is very high, and your lenders do not trust you to be able to pay your loans. That's why you're being charged a very high interest rate. High means above 4%. So what is the interest that Greece was paying for its loans before this? Compared to a maximum of 4%, they're actually paying up to 20% or even more in interest. Isn't that shocking? At one time, their interest rate shot up to even almost 30%. So they are owing so much money and paying a very huge interest on all that borrowing. The result would be Greece would have to go bankrupt because they cannot actually service such a high interest loan. Now the next question would be, what happens if actually Greece goes bankrupt? The opinion is that Greece would have to leave the Eurozone. Now what is the Eurozone? The Eurozone is a country in the European Union. European Union comprises of 28 countries. And out of these 28 countries, not all the countries are using the euro currency as their money. Okay? There are only 19 countries using euro as their money, and Greece is one of them. For example, the United Kingdom is part of the European Union, but they are still using their sterling pound. Okay? So most countries in the Eurozone or the EU are using the euro, but not all. And on the other hand, there are some countries, about 5 or 6 countries, that are not part of the European Union, but their currency is the euro. They actually use the euro for their transactions. So there are so many advantages of using the euro. It's a common currency where you can have very smooth transactions as you move from one country to another, and your transactions will be very easy, and it will stimulate trade and the economy. Which means that if you are a country that leaves the Eurozone, it is not good news for you. It's something very bad. Okay, so that could actually trigger some chain reaction. Something bad will happen to Europe or the European Union, and the economy there can actually collapse due to a tiny event like the Brexit. And if Europe gets into trouble, the United States will also get into trouble. That's why we are so concerned about Brexit. Otherwise, like the layman says, what has Greece got to do with me? It's such a small country and I don't even know where it is. You tell me it's in Europe, I thought it was in Africa. So even if a country like that collapses, it will not affect me. It may not be true. Greece is an important country. It's a European country, and if something happens to Greece, it means something bad is happening to Europe. Okay? Right now, why we are so concerned with Greece is that we are afraid it might set off a chain reaction. What is a chain reaction? When we talk about chain reaction, sometimes we think of things like the atom bomb or some nuclear bomb, where something happens to the atoms, one or two atoms, they fuse together, giving off huge amounts of energy, and that energy sets off other reactions with other atoms, and you have a huge bomb similar to that in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Very destructive. It seems that the Europe and the US are very strong in terms of the economy. America is the biggest economy in the world, and do you know that the combined economy of the European Union is similar in size as the America? Okay, let's go a little bit deeper. I'll make it simple for you. Let's talk about the world GDP. The world GDP is 60 trillion US dollars, and the American economy is GDP is about 15 trillion a couple of years ago. Right now it could be 17 or 18 trillion. Similarly, the European Union or the EU has a combined GDP of about the same size as the United States. Okay, so together they account for half of the world's GDP. Can you imagine if something happens to Europe, America will be infected, or rather they will be badly affected, and their economy will also go down together. And if Europe and the US has something bad going for them, the rest of the world will definitely be affected. It would be a catastrophic event. I'm sure you understand what is happening right now and why a lot of people are so concerned about Greece. Because Greece alone accounts for only 2% of the European Union. It's quite insignificant. But we are worried about the chain reaction that it might spark off. And then the whole world will be in trouble. Okay? So, what is going to happen if Greece eventually leaves the Eurozone? That is one of the scenarios that might set off a bad reaction in Europe. And we are not going to dwell too much on that right now, but we are going to look at Greece. What will happen to Greece itself if there's something bad that happens to the economy and they default on the loans, and the creditors go after them without giving them any chance, like what is happening right now? We ask the question, besides Greece, which other country in the world has defaulted before? Then we can have a better idea what is going to happen to Greece if it defaults. Grexit tells you the story about two countries that have gone bankrupt before. One is Argentina, and the other one recently is Iceland. Argentina actually has defaulted or gone bankrupt many times, actually 8 times. Okay, and some people say that nothing bad is actually happening to Argentina so far, but that's not true. One of the bad things that happened to Argentina is that inflation rate is very high, and at one time before their bankruptcy, the peso, the Argentine peso, is on par with the US dollar. That means 1 US dollar is 1 peso. Today, 1 US dollar is almost 9 pesos. Can you imagine the amount of disaster that the country is going through? Okay, but Argentina is not in Europe. Let's take a look at Iceland. What happened to Iceland when it went bankrupt following the American subprime crisis in 2008? Iceland actually went bankrupt because it over leveraged itself and got involved in some fantastic weapons of mass destruction financially. Okay, they got involved in CDS and swaps and a lot of funny financial instruments that eventually led to the collapse of a lot of banks, including Lehman Brothers, and even Citibank lost a lot of money. Okay, so Iceland went bankrupt because of all those things. But Iceland today has actually, in a sense, recovered. And what did they do? They did many things. You will find out in Brexit. One of the things they did was to put all the bankers into jail. And they actually helped their citizens to pay off their housing loans and some of the debts. They actually forgave the debts owed by their citizens. And this is one of the examples that Greece can actually follow if they want to recover their economy. Okay, so this is what we have in Brexit. And how does it affect the rest of the world, including us? if such an event were to take place. If, like we mentioned earlier, that the global economy is going to break down, then there is nothing much that you and I could do to prevent it. So the only thing that we can do is to think of how to survive it. And for that, we have to refer to our next book that we are going to review. That is Financial Intelligence. That's the title of another book that we are going to review shortly. Okay. For Brexit, we are going to say that if Greece eventually falls, then the country will be in deep trouble. Right now, we are already seeing that old people who are pensioners, they cannot withdraw their money from their banks, all their savings, because the country is going through some kind of capital control. They don't want people to take all their money and run away. Okay, that will even weaken the economy further. So because of that, a lot of citizens are unable to do their normal transactions. They cannot withdraw money from the banks. Okay, so that will actually happen to other countries if the whole world economy were to suffer. You can imagine the Great Depression in 1929, where a lot of people lost their jobs, and even in 2008, the subprime crisis, there was a lot of unemployment, and people got no jobs, no work, and crime shoots up, and the whole economy is very unstable. Right now in Greece, the unemployment rate is more than 20%. For people who are younger than 40 years old, the unemployment rate is even higher. It's almost up to 50%. Can you imagine? It's very disastrous for the Greece economy right now. I'm sure you'll find the Brexit book very interesting after what I've described earlier, right? It is not only very interesting, it's very crucial. It actually tells you that if something like Brexit is going to happen, it's very disastrous for the economy of the whole world, including us in Asia. You remember during the subprime crisis in 2008, where the Americans and the Europeans, they are the strong economies. They bought so much goods from countries like Asia, like China, and so many countries that are supplying goods to Europe and the US are having problems economically because these two big brothers are not able to afford to buy our goods. Thousands of factories in China actually closed down because they were not able to export their stuff to America and to Europe. So for more details on this book called Brexit, you can actually buy this book right now from the website www.andrewchia.com. Okay, it's not available in print yet because it's still in the final stages of production for the hard copy. If you want the soft copy, you can get it right now on andrewchia.com or on hugoselection.com. The next review, I will bring you another book, probably Financial Intelligence. Thank you very much.